Judge Adrian Caldwell fixes his eyes on officers Nolan Briggs and Tyler Keene from the bench, the same two who had him pinned to the pavement yesterday. Calmly, he slides off his glasses. "I know both of you," he says. "Next time, maybe check my bar card before snapping cuffs on me." Before we get into this jaw-dropping story of justice and accountability, drop where you're watching from in the comments. Tap like and subscribe if you believe the law should treat everyone the same, no matter their skin color. Now let's break down how Judge Caldwell ended up holding court in the ultimate moment of reckoning. Adrian wasn't looking for trouble that Tuesday night. At 47, the respected Philadelphia judge had spent the day at Jefferson Hospital, sitting beside his mother after heart surgery. Visiting hours came and went before doctors finally said she was stable. Only then did he leave, exhausted but relieved. He dressed down jeans, sneakers, and a navy hoodie instead of his usual sharp suit. The casual fit felt strange after years of courtroom formality, but comfort mattered in those stiff hospital chairs. Low on fuel, he pulled into a Sunoco off Roosevelt Boulevard, up in mostly white Abington Township. He'd heard about recent convenience store robberies, but didn't connect it to his quiet stop. He slid his card into pump 3 and started fueling up, mind still stuck on his mother's recovery. The station's harsh fluorescent lights threw sharp shadows across the near-empty lot. That's when he noticed a patrol car gliding in slow circles, like it was hunting. Officers Briggs and Keene, white, mid-30s, crew cuts, always scowling, had been partners for years. They were known for hard-edged policing and bragged about top arrest numbers in the precinct. Supervisors called them proactive, even though complaints had stacked up against them over the past year. Internal reviews had brushed everyone aside. Briggs leaned toward Keene and nodded at Adrian. "Check him," he murmured. "Looks like the guy from that Wawa robbery last week." Keene squinted through the windshield. Black male, medium build, hood up, could be him. The description was so broad it could have covered half the city, but neither man hesitated. They rolled in behind Adrian's BMW, blocking him, then stepped out with hands already hovering near their holsters. Adrian had watched this scene unfold in case files and testimony for years. Now it was happening to him. He inhaled slowly and kept his voice even. "Good evening, officer," he said, setting the nozzle back. "Is there an issue?" Briggs widened his stance like he owned the asphalt. "We've had reports of suspicious activity around here," Briggs said. "What are you doing?" The question was ridiculous. Adrian was literally pumping gas, but he recognized the play. "Getting fuel," he answered, "coming from the hospital. My mom had surgery." Briggs didn't acknowledge it. "ID! Now!" Adrian held eye contact. "Why am I being asked for ID when I'm just buying gas?" Briggs's jaw tightened. "You match a robbery suspect." Adrian's brow lifted. "A description, that's what? Black man?" That question hit a nerve. Keene stepped closer, voice sharp. "Sir, comply!" Adrian knew his rights. He also knew how fast comply could turn into survive. "I'm reaching for my wallet," he announced clearly, moving slowly. "My name is Adrian Caldwell. I'm a judge with the Philadelphia Court of Common Pleas." The two officers exchanged a look, and Briggs laughed like it was a joke. "Sure you are," Briggs snorted, "and I'm the governor." Before Adrian could pull his wallet, Briggs yanked his arm and slammed him into the BMW. Metal bit into Adrian's cheek. Shock flashed through him. "What are you doing?" he demanded. "This is unnecessary." Keene stayed close, hand hovering over his weapon. Briggs twisted Adrian's arms behind his back, cranking hard. "Stop resisting!" he shouted, though Adrian wasn't fighting. "I'm not resisting," Adrian forced out as cuffs snapped tight. "You're making a mistake. My judicial ID is in my wallet." Keen's tone dripped contempt. "We'll check downtown." Keen started digging through Adrian's pockets without consent. A young white woman at another pump raised her phone, recording. "Is this really necessary? Do it," she called. "He's just getting gas." Keen didn't look at her. "Ma'am, back up. Police business." The recording didn't stop. The station manager, a middle-aged South Asian man, Raj Mehta, hurried out. "Officers, I know him," Raj said, palms up. "He's a regular, a judge," Briggs barked. "Go inside before you interfere." As they dragged Adrian towards the cruiser, Adrian caught Raj's eyes. "Call Judge Dana Choi. Tell her." Raj nodded, rattled. Briggs shoved Adrian toward the back seat. Adrian felt the sting of humiliation as they ducked his head and forced him inside like a common suspect. Around the lot, more phones rose. He met the stairs through glass, swallowing anger to keep his voice steady. "This is a serious mistake," he repeated. Keen shrugged from the driver's seat. "They all say that." The cruiser rolled out, leaving Adrian's BMW shrinking behind them. 10 minutes shouldn't feel like a lifetime, but it did. Every bump pressed the cuffs deeper into his wrists. Up front, Briggs and Keen joked casually, like they were running errands. "Another one claiming he's important," Briggs chuckled. "Last week it was some guy saying he knew the mayor." Keen laughed. "Remember the lady who swore she was a surgeon? She had warrants. Siley Lil." Adrian stayed silent because he'd seen how words could be twisted into aggression on paper. The Abington station was a squat brick building washed in cold lighting that felt designed to strip people down. They parked near a rear entrance, away from public view. When they pulled him out, Adrian straightened his spine. If dignity was all he had left, he wasn't surrendering it freely. Inside booking, the air buzzed with routine cruelty. A heavy-set desk sergeant barely looked up. Briggs announced, "Gas station loiterer, matches the Wawa suspect, claims he's a judge." 2 officers nearby snickered. The sergeant finally asked, flat as cardboard, "Name?" "Adrian Caldwell," he replied, voice carrying courtroom authority. "I'm a judge in Philadelphia. I want my phone call now." The sergeant's face didn't change. "Sure you are. Empty your pockets." Adrian stayed still. "I'd like to make my call first. That's my right upon booking." That pushed the room's irritation over the edge. The sergeant stood. "This goes smoother when you cooperate. Empty your pockets. We take prints. Then maybe you call." Adrian recognized the tactic. Delay verification, control the narrative. "I can't empty them while cuffed," he said, "and I know my rights." Briggs stepped in, rough and impatient, and unfastened the cuffs. "There," he snapped. Adrian placed his wallet, keys, phone, hospital receipt, and a roll of mints on the counter. The sergeant flipped through the wallet like it was junk mail, pausing on the judicial ID with a state seal, then setting it aside anyway. "Belt and shoes," the sergeant ordered. Adrian complied, socks sinking into a cold floor. Each item removed felt like another layer of humanity peeled away. He thought of defendants he'd seen stand here, many without connections, without legal knowledge, without anyone to witness how quickly dignity could be erased. A younger black officer walked in holding coffee, glanced at Adrian, then froze. "Judge Caldwell?" he asked, uncertain. The room went quiet. Adrian nodded. Yes. The officer swallowed. Darius Monroe, sir. You lectured at the academy. Constitutional protections during arrests. He looked around, uneasy. What's going on here? The sergeant's posture shifted. You know him? Monroe nodded firmly. That's a judge. The irony landed like a hammer. The sergeant reopened the wallet and actually studied the judicial ID this time. His face tightened. Then he turned and muttered into a phone, voice suddenly respectful. Captain, you need to come to booking. Minutes later, Captain Eric Harlan strode in, tall, polished, the kind of man built for press briefings. His expression flashed with shock when he saw Adrian. Judge Caldwell, he said, warmth poured on too thick. This appears to be a misunderstanding. Adrian's gaze didn't soften. A misunderstanding of rights, procedure, and basic dignity. Harlan's smile twitched. We'll get you squared away immediately. Coffee? We can talk in my office. Adrian stayed cool. No special treatment. I want proper procedure. I'm entitled to my phone call. Harlan nodded quickly. Of course. You can use my private line. Adrian shook his head. The regular booking phone is fine. The emphasis stung, and Harlan knew it. Adrian noticed Briggs and Keene being summoned toward the captain's office. Through glass, he saw animated gestures, defensive postures. The story was already being built, one that would protect the department. Adrian dialed Judge Dana Choi, known for handling misconduct cases with steel. As he spoke in measured tones, whispers spread through the station. Officers glanced at him like he'd become a sudden threat. The desk sergeant typed furiously, likely crafting notes to shield himself. In the captain's office, arguments grew sharper. Keene pointing, Briggs stiff-armed, Harlan rubbing his forehead like the walls were closing in. When Adrian finished the call, his belongings appeared in a plastic bag, belt and shoes returned. Harlan emerged again, apology ready like a rehearsed line. Judge, I'm personally sorry for this incident. The officers were responding to robbery concerns and were being vigilant. Adrian accepted his things, but not the spin. Vigilance doesn't excuse violations. Harlan's smile thinned. Adrian continued, calm but cutting. Matching a description requires more than black man in a hoodie. Harlan tried again. In the moment, officers make split-second choices. Adrian's voice stayed level. And those choices carry consequences. I won't sign anything. I expect a full, unaltered report. Officer Monroe approached, hesitant but sincere. Sir, your car is still at the Sunoco. I can drive you back. Adrian nodded, grateful for one person acting with integrity. As they prepared to leave, Adrian's phone lit up with notifications. The gas station video had already hit social media, and it was spreading like wildfire. Walking out, Adrian's dignity was intact, but his faith felt cracked. Outside his home in Chestnut Hill, Monroe's patrol car disappeared into the night. The irony hit hard, being escorted home by the same department that had humiliated him. A neighbor walking a terrier stared a beat too long at his rumpled clothes. Adrian lifted a hand in polite greeting, painfully aware of how the image could be read. A black man in a wealthy neighborhood, disheveled, late at night. Would that neighbor have called the police on him if she didn't know his name? The thought tightened his stomach as he unlocked the door and stepped into warmth. The house smelled like vanilla and cinnamon from Tessa's candles. Normally, it would soothe him. Tonight, even home felt altered. Dad! His 19-year-old son Malik rushed in, phone clenched, eyes blazing. Nia, 16, hovered in the hallway, worried and quiet. "We saw the video," Malik said. "It's everywhere." Adrian hugged them tight, holding longer than usual. Tessa came in from the kitchen, attorney's focus battling a wife's fear. "Are you hurt?" she asked, scanning for bruises. "Not seriously," Adrian said. On the TV, local news ran shaky footage with a bold caption about a judge arrested at a gas station. Yates, they sank onto the couch. Kids pressed close like proximity could rewrite the past. Tessa's mind shifted into strategy. "I can file emergency injunctive relief in the morning. We can draft a civil rights complaint by noon. I'll call my ACLU contact." Adrian shook his head. "Not yet." Tessa stared. "Adrian, why not?" "I have a different plan," he said, voice low. He looked at his kids. "Remember the talk when you started driving?" Malik nodded, reciting like muscle memory. Hands visible. No sudden moves. "Yes, sir." "No, sir." Ask permission before reaching. Nia added softly. "Get badge numbers," Adrian exhaled. "I did all of it. It didn't matter." Nia's eyes shone. "Because they didn't see a judge," she whispered. "They saw a black man." Adrian finished the sentence with a hard swallow. His phone buzzed again. Chief Justice Richard Hamlin calling. Adrian took it in his office, surrounded by law books and framed photos that suddenly felt like props in a fragile story. "Adrian, I saw the news," Hamlin said, furious. "I've called the commissioner and the mayor. They promise a full investigation." Adrian thanked him, then heard, "Take time off. I'll shift your docket." Adrian surprised him. "Actually, I want to keep my schedule, especially tomorrow." A pause. "Are you sure?" Adrian's voice sharpened. "More sure than ever." After the call, Adrian opened his laptop. The video had exploded, hundreds of thousands of views, outrage stacked with predictable racist excuses. Emails poured in, interview requests, messages from colleagues, public statements. Then another call. His mother from the hospital, voice thin but fierce. "Baby, you okay?" he reassured her. She sighed. "Some things never change, do they?" "No," Adrian admitted quietly. Alone in the dim office, he stared at his judicial oath on the wall. The words felt both sacred and hollow. He pulled down books on judicial ethics and precedent because what he was considering would be questioned. Tessa appeared with tea. "What are you planning?" "I know that look," she said. Adrian turned the laptop toward her. "Tomorrow's docket. Judge Sanderson was supposed to hear a police misconduct complaint involving Abington Township." Tessa's eyes widened. "The same precinct?" Adrian nodded. "Sanderson just called in sick. Food poisoning. I'm next in rotation." Understanding hit, followed by worry. "That's a conflict of appearance nightmare," she warned. "I've been researching," Adrian said, steady. "There's no automatic requirement to recuse if the matters are technically separate." Tessa repeated, "Technically." Adrian's jaw set. "Let the union challenge it. For once, let the system run the way it claims to." Near midnight, he showered, but hot water couldn't erase concrete memory or cuff marks. In the mirror, bruises were blooming where Briggs had grabbed him. He thought of the men whose stories he'd heard on the bench. How many had he truly felt? Had status made him too comfortable, too insulated? As a student, he dreamed of reforming the system from within. Tonight, he wondered if the system had reformed him instead. What would you do if you were Judge Caldwell? Step aside to avoid the appearance of bias, or stay on the case to demand accountability? Comment 1 if you think he should recuse. 2, if you believe he should preside. Like and subscribe if you've ever witnessed profiling. Now let's see what he decides when opportunity knocks. Morning light stretched over Philadelphia as Briggs and Keene clocked in. They hadn't tossed and turned from guilt, only from bureaucracy. Would there be paperwork fallout from the judge incident? Captain Harlan had promised the usual outcome. At worst, paid leave. But the viral footage complicated everything, and they could feel the heat rising. While they changed, both phones buzzed with a department message. All officers involved in pending misconduct hearings had to report to Philadelphia County Courthouse, Courtroom 4B, 10 a.m., mandatory. Keene frowned. That's our Johnson complaint, right? Briggs shrugged. Routine. Sanderson is presiding. He always backs the department. A sergeant poked his head in. Briggs, Keene. Captain wants you before court. In Harlan's office, the captain looked tense, smoothing papers that didn't need smoothing. Today is a formality, he insisted. Johnson's complaint is baseless. He resisted. You followed training. They nodded, confident, because they'd seen the script work before. Answer directly. Stick to report language, Harlan said. Keene asked, what about last night? The judge! Harlan waved it off. Handled above my level. Separate issue. As they left, Briggs elbowed Keene with a smirk. Maybe we'll see him filing his complaint. They laughed, unaware of the trap their own choices had built. Across town, Adrian entered the courthouse through the private judge's entrance. The guards were unusually careful with him today. Good to see you, Judge, one said quietly. Saw the news. Shameful. Adrian nodded and kept moving. In chambers, his robe hung on the door like a symbol that suddenly carried weight, not comfort. A knock. Judge Dana Choi walked in without waiting, closing the door behind her. You should have called me the second they touched you, she said, blunt as always. Adrian didn't argue. Choi folded her arms. I hear you're taking Sanderson's docket, including the Abington misconduct hearing. Adrian nodded. I've considered the appearance issue carefully. The union will go feral, Choi warned. Adrian met her stare. When was the last time those officers faced real consequences in any courtroom? Choi didn't answer. They both knew. After a beat, she said, You're walking a tightrope. Adrian replied, Sometimes justice demands balance. She nodded once. I'll be nearby if you need backup. Adrian's clerk entered with files. The Abington case has late filings, Your Honor. Media interest is intense. Adrian nodded. Alert security. He opened the thick folder. Antoine Johnson, 24, alleged racial profiling and excessive force during a traffic stop. Names on the complaint. Officers Briggs and Keene. Adrian felt cold recognition settle in his bones. The internal investigation had predictably cleared them, despite witness statements supporting Johnson. Personnel files showed multiple complaints, 5 against Briggs, 7 against Keene, each dismissed or labeled unfounded. A pattern so loud it practically shouted. Then the prosecutor assigned to these cases, ADA Lauren Whitaker, entered with the cautious look of someone approaching a storm. Judge Caldwell, she began careful, about today's hearing. Adrian cut gently but firmly. You're here to discuss recusal. Whitaker nodded. The department has concerns about impartiality given last night. Adrian stayed professional. I reviewed the ethics guidance. There's no absolute requirement to step aside. Whitaker added, Same officers, same precinct. Adrian replied, Then file the motion. I'll hear it in open court. Whitaker left. Adrian checked the clock. Nearly 10. He put on his robe, feeling like he was stepping into armor. In the hallway, people went quiet as he passed. Staff, lawyers, deputies, faces full of curiosity and calculation. Outside courtroom 4B, the crowd was already swelling. Reporters, activists, and uniformed officers clustered like opposing tides. The bailiff opened the heavy doors. Inside, the courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Johnson sat with his public defender, Marisol Reyes, shoulders tight. Across from them, Briggs and Keene huddled with their union attorney, backs turned. "All rise," the bailiff called. "Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Adrian Caldwell, presiding." Adrian stepped up, eyes steady. Recognition hit the officers like a punch. Briggs froze mid-whisper, mouth slightly open. Keene went pale, eyes flashing to counsel in panic. The union lawyer looked confused, until the judge's name connected with the viral video. Adrian settled at the bench, arranging files with practiced calm while electricity snapped through the room like static. "Be seated," Adrian said. His voice was controlled, not theatrical, yet every syllable carried weight. He looked directly at Briggs and Keene. "We're here in Johnson versus Abington Township Police Department, a complaint alleging misconduct and excessive force." Then he paused, letting the air thicken. "I should acknowledge I recognize Officers Briggs and Keene from a personal encounter last night." Whispers rippled. The union attorney sprang up. "Your Honor, in light of that admission, we respectfully move for your immediate recusal." Adrian nodded as if he'd expected nothing less. "Noted. I'll hear formal argument." He turned to Johnson. "Mr. Johnson, are you prepared to proceed?" Johnson nodded, stunned. Adrian addressed the room. "Justice must be done and seen to be done." "The question is whether I can be impartial," Adrian continued. "I believe I can, but I'll hear arguments otherwise." He gestured to the union attorney. "Proceed!" The lawyer, Maxwell Grant, silver-haired and confident by habit, walked to the podium with the posture of someone used to winning, but the situation had rattled him, and it showed in the tightness around his eyes. "Your Honor," Grant began, "your personal interaction with my clients creates a clear risk of bias." He cited judicial canon, arguing recusal is required when impartiality might reasonably be questioned. "Appearance of impropriety alone warrants recusal," he insisted, adding that Adrian had personal knowledge about the officers that could infect the case. He finished like he dropped a gavel himself. Adrian turned to the defense table. "Ms. Reyes." Marisol Reyes stood, worn suit and tired eyes, public defense in human form. "We oppose recusal," she said. "The incident involving the court is separate from our facts. Relevant experience isn't disqualifying. If it were, no judge with criminal law familiarity could preside over the criminal matter." Adrian nodded and looked to the prosecutor. "Ms. Whitaker?" Whitaker rose, reluctant. "The Commonwealth takes no position, Your Honor. We defer to the court on ethics." Adrian understood what it meant. The DA's office didn't want to be seen challenging police, but didn't want to defend them either. He paused briefly, then delivered the decision. "The motion for recusal is denied," Adrian said firmly. Grant protested instantly. "Unprecedented! You were personally involved with these officers." Adrian raised a hand. "Justice is blind in the sense of impartiality, not ignorance," he said. "My experience doesn't bar me. It gives context. Judges don't recuse simply because reality is familiar." Adrian leaned forward slightly. "By that reasoning, a judge who suffered medical malpractice could never hear a malpractice case, and a judge who witnessed discrimination could never hear discrimination claims." The room stayed silent. Our oath requires justice without respect to persons, he continued. It doesn't demand justice without respect to truth. He looked at Grant. Your objection is preserved. We proceed. Adrian nodded to Reyes. Call your first witness. Reyes stood. The complainant calls Antoine Johnson. Johnson approached the stand, nervous, eyes flicking between the bench and the officers. After the oath, Reyes asked him to describe the stop. March 14th, he began. I was coming home from night shift at the hospital. I'm a nursing assistant. Johnson said it was around 11:30 p.m. when a police car followed him for blocks, then lit him up. They claimed a broken taillight, but mechanics later confirmed it worked fine. The pattern felt familiar. Vague reason, immediate suspicion. They asked where I was going, where I'd been, Johnson said. When I asked why I'd been stopped, Briggs told me to stop being difficult. Johnson described being ordered out, accused of smelling like marijuana. I don't use drugs, he said. I told them they could search, but I wanted an explanation first. Reyes asked what happened next. Keene grabbed my arm and yanked me out, Johnson said, voice tightening. They slammed me on the hood, cuffed me, kept yelling I was resisting when I wasn't. They searched his car, found nothing, yet still arrested him for resisting and obstruction. Reyes followed with a witness who had recorded part of the encounter. The video showed Johnson calm while being cuffed, directly contradicting the officer's report. Next, Reyes brought in two other prior complainants, both black men, describing nearly identical stops, escalations, and false charges later dropped. Briggs and Keene shifted constantly, whispering to Grant, whose confidence was draining by the minute. When Reyes introduced body cam footage from Johnson's arrest, it got worse. Johnson stayed compliant while the officers escalated. Then the footage abruptly ended. Camera malfunction, Reyes noted pointedly. Conveniently, at the exact moment Mr. Johnson allegedly became aggressive. Grant objected again and again, but each objection sounded thinner. Adrian ruled evenly, sustaining when warranted, overruling when not, careful not to hand anyone an easy accusation of bias. Still, the parallels between Johnson's story and Adrian's own arrest hung in the air like smoke no one could wave away. Right before lunch recess, an unexpected face slipped into the back row. Raj Mehta, the gas station manager from the night before. During the break, he approached Reyes and showed her something on his phone. When court resumed, Reyes stood with a new energy. Your Honor, an additional witness has come forward with relevant evidence. Meide Sadiq Datu. Adrian lifted an eyebrow. Proceed, Nunt. We call Raj Mehta, Reyes said. Raj took the stand, nervous, hands trembling slightly as he swore in. Reyes established his job as manager of the Sunoco where Adrian had been arrested. Then she asked, Do officers Briggs and Keene frequent your station? Raj nodded. Yes, almost every night on patrol. Have you observed how they treat customers? Reyes asked. Raj swallowed. Many times, he said. They often question black and brown customers, especially young men, asking what they're doing there. It's a gas station. They're buying gas. Grant shot up immediately. Objection! His voice cut through the room as tension spiked again. Adrian's gaze stayed steady on counsel, his posture calm but commanding. The crowd leaned forward, reporters' pens hovering, cameras poised. Briggs and Keene looked suddenly smaller at their table, their confidence replaced by tight, panicked whispers. Raj sat rigid, as if he could feel the weight of the room pressing on his shoulders. Grant struggled to regain control, but the courtroom's mood had shifted. Even without verdicts, something had cracked. The comfortable assumption that complaints would vanish into paperwork. Adrian watched the officers the way he'd watched countless defendants, seeing that same dawning realization: actions have consequences, and not every system will cushion the fall. Reyes kept her tone measured, letting Raj's credibility speak. She asked about specific incidents, how often the officers checked customers without cause, and whether Raj had ever seen similar behavior toward white patrons. Raj answered carefully, but honestly, describing a pattern that felt routine to him, and devastating in the way routine injustice always is. Adrian listened without theatrics, taking notes, occasionally clarifying a point for the record. He stayed strict about rules of evidence, making it impossible to claim he was running a personal vendetta. Yet the emotional truth in the room was undeniable. These weren't isolated moments. They were habits. And habits, once documented, become history. Grant attempted to frame it all as anecdotal, pushing back with legal language meant to smother discomfort. But the more he argued, the more it sounded like defense by default rather than truth. Briggs kept his arms crossed, chin raised, pretending not to care. Keene stared at the table, jaw working like he was chewing panic. Adrian's courtroom had seen plenty of performances. He could tell when confidence was genuine and when it was armor. Today, the armor was denting. He glanced briefly at Johnson, who looked both stunned and vindicated, like a man watching the universe finally admit what he'd been saying all along. Outside, the courthouse buzz grew louder with every minute. Inside, the air felt thick with consequence. Reporters scribbled furiously. Activists held still, eyes locked on the bench. The officers' union representatives watched like hawks, sensing a precedent forming in real time, one that could make future routine dismissals far less routine. Grant tried to recenter the case on procedure, not pattern, but the pattern had already entered the room. Reyes, for her part, stayed disciplined, building the record brick by brick. Adrian ensured the record stayed clean, because if this ended up on appeal, he wanted truth to survive every legal microscope. Adrian occasionally glanced toward Briggs and Keene, not with rage, but with the cool clarity of accountability. The same men who'd laughed at his identity now had to answer to a system they'd assumed would always protect them. That's what terrified them. Not Adrian's personal anger, but the possibility of an honest process. Grant raised another objection, voice sharper than necessary, but it landed weakly. Adrian ruled calmly and moved forward, unimpressed by volume. The courtroom had passed the point where loud lawyering could erase what people had seen on video, in testimony, and in the silent reactions of officers who knew the game was slipping. Reyes returned to Raj, asking if he'd ever filed complaints or reported concerns. Raj admitted he'd worried about retaliation and about being ignored. But after last night, he said quietly, I realized if it can happen to a judge, it can happen to anyone. A murmur rolled through the gallery like distant thunder. Adrian held the room steady with a single look, then nodded for the testimony to continue. His tone stayed even, but every procedural step carried a deeper message. The court wasn't a stage for intimidation today. It was a place where facts would be heard fully, especially the facts people usually worked hardest to bury. Grant attempted to frame it all as anecdotal, pushing back with legal language meant to smother discomfort. But the more he argued, the more it sounded like defense by default rather than Ruth. Briggs kept his arms crossed, chin raised, pretending not to care. Keene stared at the table, jaw working like he was chewing panic. Adrian watched Grant's strategy wobble. Cross-examination without strong footing can backfire fast, and this was starting to. Briggs shifted in his chair, eyes flicking it toward the exit like a man measuring distance. Keene leaned in to whisper, then stopped, realizing the microphones near counsel table were picking up everything. Adrian maintained a neutral face, but inside he felt the weight of the moment, not revenge, not spectacle, an uncomfortable necessary exposure. He kept rulings precise, mindful of appeal standards, mindful of ethics, mindful that the world was watching for any hint of personal score settling. He gave them none, only structure and scrutiny. With each answer Raj gave, the case's theme sharpened. Not one bad night, but repeated choices. Reyes guided the testimony toward specific examples, and Raj described officers questioning customers for no reason beyond appearance. Grant objected again, desperate to contain the narrative. Adrian's gavel didn't need to slam. His calm rulings were louder than noise. Reyes shifted, preparing to connect Raj's observations to Johnson's complaint and the officer's broader history. The courtroom leaned forward, sensing where it was headed. Adrian kept his hands folded, listening like a metronome, steady, impartial, relentless, letting the process do what it rarely does when power is on trial: reveal itself. Johnson's earlier testimony echoed in everyone's mind as Raj spoke. The vague stop, the instant escalation, the resisting label used like a switch to justify force. Reyes didn't need to overstate anything. The similarities assembled themselves. The more carefully she built it, the harder it became for anyone to dismiss as coincidence. Grant tried to interrupt momentum with procedural arguments, but the room's patience was thinning. Even people who usually trusted the badge looked unsettled. Briggs and Keene weren't the confident hunters from the gas station anymore. Under fluorescent courtroom light, they looked like men realizing the spotlight doesn't always warm. It can burn. Adrian's eyes briefly swept the gallery. Activists, reporters, quiet court staff, uniformed officers standing stiffly. He understood what was at stake. If he mishandled this, it would be labeled personal vengeance. If he handled it perfectly, it would still be attacked. But the record would outlive the attacks. That's why he stayed disciplined. Reyes ended a line of questions and let Raj breathe. The manager's shoulders dropped slightly, as if simply telling the truth in a courtroom was its own kind of risk. Adrian made a note, then looked to Grant. Cross! Grant stood slowly, measuring his words, trying to regain ground he could feel crumbling beneath his feet. Grant opened with tone and posture, tools he used when facts were thin. He implied Raj had misinterpreted routine policing. Raj replied plainly, "They don't do it to everyone, mostly to black and brown customers." The courtroom stiffened. Grant's jaw tightened. He pressed harder, and Raj's answers stayed steady, refusing to be bullied into silence. Adrian monitored the exchange closely, stepping in only to enforce fairness and relevance. Grant attempted to suggest Raj was exaggerating after seeing the viral video. Raj answered, "The video just proved what I've watched for months." That line hit like a stone dropped in still water. Briggs stared forward, face set, while Keene's leg bounced under the table. Grant objected again, but it sounded like reflex now. Adrian ruled calmly and moved forward. The hearing had become something bigger than one complaint, an anatomy lesson in how power behaves when it assumes it won't be questioned. And now, in open court, it was being questioned, with evidence, with witnesses, with a record. Reyes asked to admit additional supporting materials connected to Raj's observations. Grant fought it, but Reyes had laid careful foundation. Adrian assessed each item by the book, admitting what fit, excluding what didn't. That balance mattered. It signaled to everyone watching that this wasn't a show trial. It was the law finally doing its job without flinching. As proceedings pushed toward the next phase, the tension didn't fade. It sharpened. Briggs and Keene whispered urgently, their earlier swagger gone. Grant leaned in, voice low, trying to keep them from spiraling. Johnson sat rigid, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the bench like he was afraid the moment might evaporate if he blinked. Reyes turned back to Raj for a final clarification. Frequency, pattern, who was targeted, who wasn't. Raj answered in careful detail, grounding his claims in routine observations, patrol times, repeated interactions, familiar lines the officers used. Adrian nodded, documenting everything. The courtroom silence felt heavy, not empty. Like everyone was holding the same breath. Grant snapped upright again, unable to let the testimony land cleanly. "Objection!" he launched, voice edged with frustration, as if loudness could rewind the last hour. The word cut through the room like a blade, and for a moment, everything paused on that single syllable, suspended right at the brink of consequences. "Your Honor, this testimony about other encounters is irrelevant and prejudicial," Grant objected. "It shows pattern and practice, Your Honor," Reyes shot back, "and goes directly to whether Mr. Johnson's experience was isolated or part of something systemic." Adrian considered a beat. "Objection overruled. The witness may continue." Raj cleared his throat, fingers worrying the edge of the witness box. "After what happened to you last night, Judge," he said, "I checked our security cameras. We keep recordings for 2 weeks for insurance." Reyes stepped forward with a laptop. "Your Honor, Mr. Mehta has provided station footage from March 14th. Adrian felt the entire courtroom tighten. The footage captures Officers Briggs and Keene at the station roughly an hour before they stopped Mr. Johnson, Reyes explained. You can hear them discussing needing a few more stops to hit their monthly numbers. Grant leapt up. "Objection. This was never produced during discovery." "Because Mr. Mehta only came forward today," Reyes answered. "The defense has always had the option to subpoena video from businesses along Mr. Johnson's route." Adrian weighed it carefully. "The video is admitted conditionally," he ruled. "Mr. Grant will have a full opportunity to review and challenge." On the monitor, the grainy footage showed Briggs and Keene leaning against their cruiser, coffee cups in hand. Their voices echoed through the silent courtroom, joking about needing 1 or 2 more stops and finding some action. Then Keene's line, "Let's hit the south side. Always good for a few grabs there." Everyone in the room knew the south side meant mostly black and Latino neighborhoods. Adrian watched the officers instead of the screen. Briggs stared at the floor, tension in his jaw. Keene whispered urgently to Grant, panic rising. The pattern of targeted harassment was no longer theoretical. It was on tape. Sensing the tide turning, Grant requested a short recess. Adrian agreed, watching Briggs and Keene trail their attorney out, their earlier swagger completely gone. When they returned, Grant announced they'd call Captain Eric Harlan to testify about departmental policy. As Harlan took the stand, Adrian noticed his nervous glances toward them. The strategy was obvious. Shift blame upward to vague policies instead of individual choices. What they hadn't grasped was that this opened the door to putting the entire system under a microscope. Exactly what Adrian had been aiming toward from the moment he chose not to step aside. At first, Harlan sounded polished and rehearsed. With 28 years on the job, he framed himself as a seasoned professional. He spoke about academy training, use of force guidelines, and glossy community policing initiatives. Our officers receive extensive instruction on constitutional law, he assured. We emphasize de-escalation and proportional response. Reyes's cross-examination quickly chipped the varnish. Captain Harlan, does your department use quotes for stops or arrests? He shifted. We have performance metrics, not quotas. Officers are expected to be proactive. Reyes didn't blink. And those metrics are measured how? He hesitated. Activity levels, number of stops, arrests, among other things. And officers who don't meet those activity levels, does that affect evaluations, promotions? Reyes pressed. Harlan's pause said plenty. Lower activity can reflect poorly on initiative, he admitted. Reyes nodded slowly. So there is a built-in incentive to make stops, whether or not they're constitutionally justified. Grant objected, but the damage was done. When Briggs and Keene took the stand, their stories began unraveling almost immediately. Briggs insisted Johnson reach toward his waistband. Keene testified it was a sudden move toward the glove box. Neither motion was visible on the body cam clip. Neither had been mentioned in their original written report. Adrian watched their discomfort like a surgeon observing symptoms. He'd seen this pattern for years, post hoc justifications being constructed on the fly. Officer Briggs, Adrian interrupted during Grant's questioning. You testified the stop was for a broken tail light. Correct! Briggs nodded stiffly. Yes, Your Honor. Yet the mechanic's inspection from the very next morning shows every light functioning, Adrian said. How do you explain that discrepancy? Briggs swallowed. It must have been fixed before inspection, Your Honor. Adrian raised an eyebrow. Overnight, without Mr. Johnson's knowledge? He let the implication hang, then turned the page in his notes. You also described Mr. Johnson as belligerent and uncooperative, Adrian continued. Yet the body cam segment we do have shows him calm and compliant. How do you reconcile that? Briggs latched onto the familiar excuse. He became aggressive after the camera malfunctioned. How convenient, Adrian murmured, annotating the record. Under questioning, Keene began to unravel. His answers grew halting, eyes darting between Briggs and Grant like a trapped animal. When Reyes asked about the gas station conversation, needing more stops for quota, he stammered, That's just how we talk. It doesn't actually mean anything. Reyes tilted her head. So you weren't planning quota-driven stops? Keene looked cornered. It's complicated. There's pressure to show we're producing results. Pressure from where? Reyes asked. He flicked his eyes toward Harlan, then back to his lap. From supervisors. From the culture. Grant hurried to redirect, but it was too late. The curtain had been pulled back on more than 2 officers. During a brief recess, Adrian noticed a young officer entering the courtroom, speaking quietly with Reyes. When proceedings resumed, she stood with a new witness. The complainant calls Officer Darius Monroe. The same black officer who'd recognized Adrian in booking walked to the stand, uniform crisp, nerves visible in his shoulders. After swearing in, Monroe glanced toward the defense table, apology written across his face. Officer Monroe, Reyes began, how long have you served in Abington Township? About 15 months, ma'am. During training, what were you told about conducting stops in certain neighborhoods? Monroe hesitated. We were told to be more vigilant in high crime areas. And which areas were labeled high crime? Reyes asked. Monroe shifted. Mostly the south and east sides, predominantly minority neighborhoods. Were you given concrete standards for reasonable suspicion? Reyes pushed. Officially, yes, Monroe answered carefully. But unofficially, he trailed off. Unofficially? What, officer? Reyes prodded gently. Monroe inhaled deeply, then looked straight at Adrian. Unofficially, senior officers said certain things were suspicious because of who was involved and where. A black man driving a nice car in a white neighborhood, a young black guy in a hoodie. Furtive movements that could mean almost anything. Grant exploded with objections, but Adrian overruled him. The witness is describing his lived experience of training, Adrian said. The objection is denied. Monroe went on. Briggs and Keene were praised as productive because they made lots of stops and arrests, especially of minorities. His voice shook, but he kept talking. After Judge Caldwell was brought in last night, Monroe added, I overheard Officer Briggs say they'd bagged another one before realizing who he was. A low gasp rippled through the crowd. Adrian stayed still, though hearing his own humiliation framed as a catch made his stomach clench. What happened once they realized he was a judge, Ed Tice? Reyes asked. Monroe's answer landed like a hammer. Captain Harlan pulled everyone involved together and said we had to get our story straight because judges protect their own. Dispatch was told to modify the call log to show a specific suspicious person complaint matching the judge. The room reacted like it had taken a collective punch. Evidence tampering wasn't just misconduct, it was criminal. Harlan's face went ashen. As Monroe continued, Keene looked like he might be sick. During the next recess, he leaned toward Grant, speaking in urgent, low tones, clearly rattled to his core. When court resumed, Grant stood. Your Honor, Officer Keene requests an in-camera conference with the court and counsel. Adrian considered, then nodded. Very well. We'll adjourn to chambers. Officer Keene, Ms. Reyes, Mr. Grant, and the court reporter only. In chambers, Keene sat hunched, like the weight of his vest had doubled. And I need to clarify something, he started, voice raw. What I said earlier about pressure and culture, it's worse than I let on. Grant tried to shut him down, but Keene shook his head. We're taught to use certain magic words in reports. Furtive movements, match description, appeared nervous. He looked straight at Adrian. Those phrases are code. They justify stops even when we don't have specific facts. His voice cracked. Last night with you, we had no real basis to approach you except that I was a black man at a gas station in a white suburb, Adrian finished. Keene nodded miserably. That's how the culture trains us, Keene said. Not on paper, unofficially. You get praised for being proactive in certain neighborhoods with certain people. His confession didn't just implicate himself and Briggs. It reached the command staff, training officers, evaluation metrics, the entire scaffolding of the department. By the time they returned to the courtroom, word had already whispered through the benches that Keene was cooperating. Briggs looked betrayed, eyes burning. Harlan looked furious. The ADA, Lauren Whitaker, suddenly seemed very aware of which way the wind was blowing and how many of her office's cases it might topple. Whitaker requested a brief recess to reassess the Commonwealth's position. In the gallery, people whispered about the unprecedented moment, officers breaking the code of silence on the record. Many had lived versions of these encounters for years, and never once seen an officer held accountable. When court reconvened, the energy had shifted dramatically. Whitaker stood. "Your Honor, in light of new testimony, the Commonwealth is expanding its investigation to include departmental policies and potential criminal charges related to evidence alteration." Grant, watching his defense crumble, asked for time to discuss settlement. Before Adrian could respond, Briggs jumped up. "This is bull!" he shouted, face flushed. "We were doing our jobs. If people would just comply, stop crying racism every time, we wouldn't be here." Grant tried to shush him, but Briggs barreled on. "You all want special treatment. Even as a judge, you think you're above the law." The courtroom froze. Reynolds, Keene, stared at his partner in horror, scooting his chair away as if from a fire. Adrian let the outburst run, just long enough for everyone to hear it, unfiltered. Then, "Officer Briggs, that's enough." His calm voice sliced through the chaos. "Your comments will be fully included in the record." He glanced at the stenographer. "Please ensure every word is transcribed." Turning back to Briggs, whose anger had curdled into dawning panic, Adrian added, "People often reveal their truest beliefs under pressure. Thank you for your candor, officer." The defense hadn't just cracked, it had collapsed in on itself, but the implications stretched well beyond two men in uniform. What began as a single misconduct hearing had evolved into an X-ray of an entire policing culture. "Do you think Keene was brave in coming forward?" the narrator's voice cuts back in. "Or just trying to protect himself once he realized the ship was sinking?" "Drop a 1 in the comments if you think he showed real remorse," the host continues, "or a 2 if it was pure self-preservation. And if Brennan's outburst shocked you, smash that like button, because what happens next turns one complaint into a full-scale system audit. All afternoon, the hearing expanded from individual misconduct to structural review. Grant protested, "Your Honor, this proceeding concerns a specific complainant and specific officers, not the entire department." Adrian met his gaze. "When evidence suggests individual actions reflect institutional patterns, this court has both the right and duty to examine those patterns. The public interest demands it." With that, Adrian essentially placed the whole department on trial. Reyes seized the moment, calling other residents who'd filed prior complaints. Their stories echoed each other, being stopped for vague reasons, accused of matching a description, subjected to aggressive tactics, charges later dropped without explanation. A community organizer presented statistical analysis from public records. In predominantly white neighborhood, she testified, officers generally require specific, articulable suspicion. In Black and Latino neighborhoods, just being in a so-called high-crime area is treated as enough. The disparities couldn't be brushed aside as random or purely crime-driven. As numbers and narratives stacked up, media coverage intensified. National outlets set up live shots outside. Inside, the gallery swelled with neighbors who'd felt this policing for years. Their presence gave the data faces. Every bar on a graph represented someone's brother, daughter, father, someone who'd stood where Johnson had stood. Adrian allowed expert witnesses to speak. Dr. Eleanor Simmons, a criminal justice scholar, explained how phrases like furtive movements, and appeared nervous act as legal camouflage. They look neutral on paper, she said, but are deployed disproportionately against people of color, turning vague hunches into seemingly objective justification. By mid-afternoon, Commissioner Frank Hargrove arrived, face tight. During a recess, he requested a private conversation. Adrian declined. "Any contribution you make must be on the record," he ruled. That forced the commissioner to take the stand publicly, an almost unheard-of step, to defend departmental policies in front of cameras and community. "We categorically reject racial profiling," Hargrove insisted, sweat beating at his temple. "Our policies expressly forbid using race as a factor." Reyes's cross was surgical. "If that's true, Commissioner, how do you explain enforcement disparities even after controlling for crime rates, call volume, assignment patterns?" He fumbled, offering nothing that survived basic scrutiny. Outside, the crowd grew, signs raised, "Justice for Adrian, justice for Antoine, end quotas, equal protection." What started at a gas pump had become a civic earthquake. Adrian received notes that the mayor and city council wanted a meeting. Again, he insisted. Anything relevant had to happen inside the courtroom on the record. When proceedings resumed, Monroe returned with more news. "After I'd testified earlier," he said, "several officers approached me privately. They want to come forward about internal practices, but are terrified of retaliation." Adrian faced an ethical dilemma. Hearing them could be crucial, but they weren't parties to the case. After arguments from both sides, Adrian decided, "This court will accept testimony from these officers under seal, with their identities protected until adequate whistleblower safeguards exist." Grant exploded in protest, but Adrian held. "The search for truth outweighs your discomfort, Mr. Grant. Objection overruled." One by one, 5 officers quietly confirmed what Monroe and Keene had already laid bare: unofficial quotas, evaluation systems rewarding aggressive enforcement in minority neighborhoods, report writing templates full of magic phrases, pressure to support the blue wall, even when fellow officers clearly crossed lines. One officer's words hit especially hard. "We were taught, informally, that if you write furtive movements or match description, courts almost always uphold the stop. You don't have to spell out anything specific." It was an admission that constitutional standards had become a script to game, not a guardrail to honor. As the hours stretched, more records surfaced. Performance evaluations highlighting productivity, internal emails praising high-stop officers, no meaningful tracking of constitutional violations. Officers with impressive stop and arrest numbers got the coveted assignments and quicker promotions. The message was clear. Numbers mattered more than rights. Recalled to the stand, Harlan had to acknowledge that evaluations tracked stops and arrests, but not whether they held up legally or respected civil rights. "We assume our officers follow the law," he said weakly. Adrian responded, "Assumption is not oversight, Captain. Not when liberty is at stake." Ada Whitaker looked more rattled with each revelation. Her office had built countless prosecutions on stops like these. Near day's end, she approached the bench. "Your Honor, given the testimony, the Commonwealth requests time to re-examine how we assess officer credibility and evidence in criminal matters. It was a rare, significant concession. That kind of review could ripple through hundreds of pending cases." Exactly the kind of systemic shift Adrian had hoped would come from allowing this hearing to widen. As the day neared adjournment, Grant made a last-ditch attempt to contain the damage. "Your Honor, my clients are prepared to acknowledge errors in Mr. Johnson's case and adjust procedures accordingly." But that offer was far too small for what had been revealed. This wasn't about a few errors. It was architecture. "We've heard evidence of patterns, not anomalies," Adrian said. "A narrow admission won't repair a wide fracture." He looked out over the packed courtroom, knowing his next moves would reverberate far beyond its walls. "We'll hear final arguments tomorrow," Adrian announced. "Remedies must address not only Mr. Johnson's injury, but the broader constitutional concerns exposed today." As people filed out, he watched Antoine talking quietly with his family, carrying both the burden and the unexpected power of being at the center of a potential landmark. Briggs and Keene left separately now. Keene looked worn but strangely lighter, as if telling the truth had finally loosened a vice on his chest. Briggs's face stayed hard, jaw clenched, shoving past reporters without a word. Adrian remained on the bench, alone reviewing notes until the courtroom was nearly empty. What had begun as personal humiliation was now something else. An opportunity for genuine reform that might outlast him. The question wasn't just what justice looked like for Johnson or for himself, but whether a single hearing could nudge an entrenched system toward real, lasting change. That night, protesters and supporters filled the courthouse steps. Signs reading "Justice for Judge Caldwell," "Reform Abington PD," and "Equal Protection Under Law" bobbed in the crowd. Adrian slipped in through the judge's entrance again, but he knew his name and his experience had become a symbol larger than one man. In chambers, he faced a challenge he'd never seen in any judicial handbook. To close the loop, his own arrest now had to be part of the official record, but he couldn't ethically preside over a proceeding where he was also a witness. After conferring with Chief Justice Hamlin, they crafted an unusual solution. Judge Dana Choi would briefly take over the bench while Adrian testified. Then he'd return to rule. "All rise," the bailiff intoned the next morning. "The Honorable Judge Dana Choi, presiding." She explained the arrangement clearly. To preserve transparency, Judge Caldwell will testify regarding his encounter with these officers. I will preside during that portion. Adrian removed his robe, stepped down from the bench, and took the witness stand. The sight alone, a judge sitting where defendants and victims usually sat, sent a hush through the room. Under oath, he recounted the gas station encounter, the dismissal of his ID, the unnecessary force, the treatment at the station. His tone was measured, every detail precise, but the emotional undercurrent was unmistakable. He spoke of the physical discomfort, the bruises, but also the psychic blow, being stripped in an instant of the status that had once insulated him, seen first and foremost not as a judge, but as a black man. "When Officer Briggs slammed me against my car," Adrian testified, "I felt 2 centuries of American history pressing into that steel alongside my cheek." Reyes, temporarily representing his interest, asked how it had changed him. "It shook my faith," he admitted. "I've defended this system for years. Experiencing its failure firsthand was disorienting." Grant's cross-examination was cautious, almost deferential, challenging Adrian's credibility after everything that had come out would have been suicidal. He kept to narrow procedural questions, times, distances, sequences, but avoided the heart of it. When Adrian finished, he stepped off the stand and disappeared briefly into chambers. Judge Choi then heard closing arguments. Reyes argued the evidence showed not just misconduct, but system design demanding court-ordered reform. Grant claimed any wrongdoing was isolated, not reflective of policy. When both sides finished, Adrian returned, robe back on, resuming the bench. He addressed the unusual setup directly. "These proceedings are unconventional," he acknowledged. "I've been both subject and adjudicator. Some might say that undermines propriety, but recusing now would effectively block judicial review of issues I've personally witnessed. That would be its own form of injustice." He looked out over the silent courtroom. Impartiality doesn't require ignorance of reality. Before he could deliver judgment, Briggs surprised everyone by standing. "Your Honor, may I speak?" Adrian hesitated, then nodded. "Briefly." Briggs approached the podium, no longer radiating defiance, but uncertainty. "I've been wearing this badge 11 years, he began. "My father wore one before me. I thought I was doing what they taught me was right." He swallowed hard. "Yesterday, listening to all those stats and stories, I'd never put it together like that. I always saw each stop as a separate decision, a gut feeling something was wrong." Finally, he met Adrian's eyes. "When we stopped you, I didn't see a judge. I saw what we're trained to see as a threat." The room held its breath. "I'm not saying I don't own what I did," Briggs said. "I do. But this is bigger than me or Keene. It's how we're taught to look at certain people, certain neighborhoods, how we're rewarded when we act on those assumptions." It wasn't total transformation, but it was a crack. Adrian gave a small nod, neither praising nor condemning. Then he recessed briefly to finalize his ruling. When he returned, the weight of what he was about to say settled on everyone's shoulders. "This court finds," Adrian began, "that Officers Briggs and Keene violated Mr. Johnson's constitutional rights through racial profiling and excessive force." Further, he continued, "The evidence shows these violations reflect departmental patterns, not isolated misjudgments." The gallery stayed utterly still. Remedies must address not only individual accountability and systemic repair. He turned first to the officers' table. "Officers Briggs and Keene are suspended without pay for 6 months and must complete intensive retraining before any return to duty." He looked to the department brass. "Second, Abington Township Police shall implement comprehensive reforms, mandatory body cameras that cannot be disabled during citizen encounters, evaluation systems that prioritize constitutional compliance over raw stop and arrest counts, and department-wide implicit bias training with regular reassessment." "Third," Adrian said, voice firm, "this court orders the creation of a civilian oversight board with real authority to review complaints and recommend discipline. That board must include residents from communities most heavily policed." He turned to Antoine. "Mr. Johnson will be compensated for his unlawful detention. The amount will be decided in later proceedings." Finally, he addressed the wider implications. "The evidence suggests possible rights violations in numerous other cases. Accordingly, this court orders a review of all arrests made by this department over the past 3 years, where the initiating stop relied on vague justifications like matched description or furtive movements." The reactions were a spectrum: cautious relief among community members, visible anxiety on the faces of command staff, quiet tears from Johnson finally believed. Keene looked almost grateful to have the truth named. Briggs seemed overwhelmed, the weight of his choices pressing harder than any body armor. Justice requires accountability, Adrian concluded. But reform demands more than punishment. It requires transforming practices and ultimately perspectives. He looked around the room one last time. That work starts today. Its success depends on everyone here, long after this hearing is over. With a final decisive rap of the gavel, he adjourned. The narrative voice returns. The hearing ended, the host says, but its aftershocks were just getting started. That one gas station stop now threatened hundreds of questionable cases and forced a department, a city, and a community to decide what kind of justice system they truly wanted. 6 months later, Judge Adrian Caldwell stood behind a podium at the Abington Township Community Center, addressing the very first meeting of the Police Accountability Commission he now chaired. The room overflowed. Officers beside activists, officials next to ordinary residents, all drawn together by a story that had refused to stay quiet. When I agreed to lead this commission, Adrian said, plenty of people doubted anything would actually change. We've all seen blue ribbon panels that produce glossy reports and zero results. He gestured toward the crowd. What makes this different is you, the people in this room, sharing responsibility. Reforms had gone beyond even his early hopes. Every officer now wore a body camera that switched on automatically during public encounters, with footage uploaded to servers reviewed in part by civilians. Stop data was logged and analyzed monthly for racial disparities, then posted publicly for everyone to see. Most radically, the evaluation system was rebuilt. No more promotions for sheer volume of stops and arrests. Officers were now rewarded for de-escalation, constitutional compliance, and meaningful community engagement. In the last 6 months, discretionary stops have dropped 40%, Adrian reported. Crime hasn't spiked. In most categories, it's flat or down. That supports what many here have said for years, he continued. Aggressive stop tactics don't automatically equal safety. They often just corrode trust. In the front row sat Officer Darius Monroe, recently promoted to lead a new community relations unit. Beside him was Officer Tyler Keene, back in uniform after serving his suspension. Monroe's courage had helped crack the code of silence. Keene, meanwhile, had leaned into the hard work, becoming an internal advocate for constitutional policing, mentoring rookies, and owning the harm he'd helped cause. Some community members still eyed him warily, but others were beginning to acknowledge his efforts to change course. Near the back sat Officer Nolan Briggs. His path had been messier. He'd fought the reforms, nearly quit more than once. Only with time therapy, tough conversations, and an unexpected ally in Antoine Johnson had he begun facing his own bias honestly. He wasn't ready for the spotlight, but he was there listening. Adrian spoke of those individual journeys, then shifted to institutional change. We've done more than check boxes on a court order, he said. We've redesigned training to focus on why these rights matter, not just what to recite. We've built policy with community voices at the table, not as an afterthought. Most importantly, they'd started building a culture where officers could raise concerns without destroying their careers. Adrian introduced a panel that included Antoine Johnson, now back in school, pursuing a criminal justice degree, determined to work on policy reform. A man once dismissed as resisting was now shaping the future of enforcement. The night I was pulled over, Antoine told the crowd, all I wanted was for someone to admit what happened was wrong. He glanced toward Adrian. What Judge Caldwell showed us is that acknowledgement isn't the finish line. It's the starting gun. Real justice means changing what happens next. The transformation spilled past courtrooms and council meetings. The Sunoco, where Adrian was arrested, had become an unlikely symbol. Raj Mehta installed a small plaque marking the incident, then started hosting monthly dialogue circles between officers and residents. Free coffee, real talk, and no cameras, just people trying to understand each other. Adrian's son, Malik, had changed, too. At first, he'd been furious and exhausted, ready to write off the whole system. But watching his father refuse to walk away, seeing reforms actually take root, pushed him toward engagement instead of retreat. He joined a youth advisory council that reviewed training scenarios from a teenager's perspective. Now Malik was thinking seriously about his own path, maybe law school, maybe even wearing a badge one day. Not to uphold the old way, but to help build a better one from the inside. Nia, his younger sister, ran a student group that taught kids their rights during police encounters, using their father's case as a lesson. The biggest change isn't in the paperwork, Adrian told the gathering. It's in the tiny, everyday interactions. He described a scene from the previous week. A young officer approaching a stranded black teenager at that same gas station, offering help instead of demands, explanation before questions, no hand hovering on a holster. It was ordinary, Adrian said, and that's what made it extraordinary. He didn't sugarcoat things. Some officers still resented the changes. Some residents still flinched when they saw flashing lights behind them. Neighboring departments were slow to adopt similar reforms. Progress wasn't neat. It stumbled, stalled, and sometimes slid backward. Transformation isn't a single moment, he reminded them. It's a process, messy, uncomfortable, ongoing. The incident at the gas station had ripped the mask off deep problems, but it had also revealed something else, a community's capacity to confront ugly truths and still choose to build, not burn, what came next. Later that day, Adrian stopped for gas at that same Sunoco. As he filled his tank, he noticed a young black driver at the next pump watching a patrol car warily. A uniformed officer walked out of the store, nodded respectfully at them both, then headed to his cruiser. The young man's posture relaxed just a fraction. Adrian caught his eye, and they shared a brief nod. Not mission accomplished, but we're moving. As Adrian drove home through streets now patrolled by officers under new expectations, he thought about how one night of humiliation had become a hinge point for genuine change. The system still wasn't flawless. It probably never would be. But it was better, more transparent, more accountable, more honest about its own flaws. And in the long, hard work of justice, better isn't something to dismiss. It's something to protect, nurture, and push further. The narrator's voice returns, leaning into the camera. So what do you think about Abington Township's reform? They ask. Is meaningful transformation possible inside our current policing frameworks? Or do we need something more radical, a ground-up rebuild? They hold your gaze. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to hear your stories. If this journey hit home for you, the host adds, smash that like button. It might feel small, but engagement tells the platforms this is content that matters and pushes conversations about justice and accountability into more people's feeds. They gesture towards the subscribe button. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Because here's the truth, they continue. Each of us plays a part in what kind of system we live under. When we witness injustice, Whether online or on the sidewalk, we can look away, or we can push, question, organize, and demand better. Judge Caldwell chose the second option. He could have recused himself and stayed comfortable. Instead, he used his vantage point to open the curtain on practices many people insisted didn't exist. He forced a department, a DA's office, and a whole city to stare at reality, and then to do something about it. Have you ever watched something unfair happen and wished you had the power to change the system behind it? They ask. What would you have done in Adrian Caldwell's shoes? Stepped aside to avoid controversy, or stayed on the case and risked the backlash to push for accountability? Drop your answer below, they say. I read every comment. They smile, but it's tinged with seriousness. If this story resonated, tap that like button so more people see it. Algorithms notice when you engage. Your click, your share, actually helps push these conversations into the mainstream. Subscribe if you want more deep dive stories about social justice, racial equity, and real people forcing institutions to face their own failures, they add. We don't just chase headlines around here. We unpack how systems work and how they can be changed through real narratives, real stakes, real lives. Share this video with someone who insists racial profiling is exaggerated or who believes the system works fine as long as you just comply, the host says. Not to win an argument, but to open a window. Sometimes a story hits where statistics alone never will. Because at the end of the day, they continue, this isn't just about one judge, one traffic stop, or one police department. It's about what kind of country we're building, where the law protects everyone equally, or only some of us, some of the time. Justice isn't a finish line, they say. It's a practice. It's policy, yes, but it's also culture, habit, the split-second decisions people make because of how they've been trained to see each other. When those habits get exposed and challenged, there's a chance, not a guarantee, but a chance for something better. Has there been a moment in your life where you realized the system around you wasn't as fair as you'd believed? They ask. What did you do with that realization? Did you shut down or speak up? Did it change how you move through the world? Tell me in the comments, they say gently. These stories aren't just content, they're fuel for understanding and action. Then they'd lean back slightly. Thank you for spending this time with me and with Judge Adrian Caldwell, Antoine Johnson, and everyone in Abington fighting for something better. Remember, the host concludes, justice isn't automatic. It's built through choices, pressure, courage, and yes, sometimes a single night that changes everything. Keep asking hard questions. Keep speaking truth to power. And until next time, take care of yourselves and each other, seeing the system with new eyes. If you are in your late 60s or 70s, you've seen this country change more times than you can count. You remember when a black man could be stopped for nothing more than looking out of place. And some folks said, that's just how it is. Judge Adrian Caldwell's story reminds us that how it is can still be deeply wrong, even in 2025. Here was a man with a law degree on his wall, decades on the bench, a nice car, a good neighborhood, and none of it protected him when two officers chose to see a threat instead of a tired son getting gas after sitting by his mother's hospital bed. For many of you, it confirms an old, painful lesson. Justice in America is precious, but still uneven. still fragile, still something we must guard with both eyes open. Courage is contagious at any age. But there is another lesson here, one that may give you hope. Change did not come just because Adrian wore a black robe. It came because ordinary people refused to look away. A young nursing assistant spoke up. A gas station owner saved his camera footage. A patrol officer and even one of the arresting cops finally broke the code of silence. Older Americans know what it means to take a risk for what is right. Many of you marched, wrote letters, or quietly helped neighbors when it wasn't popular. In this story, courage moves from person to person like a lantern being passed down a dark road, each hand adding a little more light. The work isn't over, but it's working. The reforms that followed, body cameras that stay on, fairer evaluations, a real civilian board, didn't erase the harm, but they did bend the path in a better direction. For a generation that has watched promises come and go, it matters that 6 months later, the numbers are clearer, the rules tighter, the conversations more honest. You may never stand on a bench like Judge Caldwell, but you still vote, you still speak, you still tell your grandchildren what this country can and should be. His long night at that Sunoco station turned into a turning point because people your age and younger refused to shrug and move on. That is the quiet, stubborn power of a lifetime. You know that progress is slow, but you also know it is possible and worth fighting for, right up to the last chapter. After walking through Judge Caldwell's journey from humiliation at a gas pump to real reform in a police department, I'd love to hear from you. In your lifetime, have you ever watched an unfair situation turn into real change because someone finally spoke up? What did that moment teach you about courage and community? Share your story in the comments. Hit like if this message resonated with you, and subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss future videos that dig deep into justice, dignity, and the kind of country we leave our grandchildren.